Toby. I'm a writer, a facilitator, and a traveler. I'm currently based in Costa Rica, and I am about to publish my first book. It's called Vagabondess, A Guide to Solo Female Travel, and it's not just for women, and it's not just for travelers. It's really a guide to facing our fears and living whatever adventure calls to us. And as I've been editing and proofing the book in quarantine, a lot of themes have come up that actually feel surprisingly relevant to what our current reality is, which is interesting because it's a book about being out there, right? Like going out into the world, and yet so much of it feels relevant to what we're living right now, which is being very much closed in, very much isolated. So that was the inspiration for our talk today, which is lessons from solo travel for quarantine. And I think that covers it.
Awesome. So thank you so much for joining us, Tobes. And so just to give you all a sense of the flow of the evening. So we're in a moment here, Toby and I will start having a conversation, hearing some of Toby's thoughts and wisdom and sharing, and that will go for maybe 20 minutes or so. And then the last part of the talk will open it back up and have more of a conversation where you all can share your experiences and ask questions as well. Yeah. So without further ado, Tobes, would love to hear some of the things that have been brewing around in regards to your experience traveling and being by yourself, because I certainly think of you as someone who, like I remember traveling with you and feeling like you always had this presence about you and this way of being in your own skin that I really admired. And it's actually inspired me quite a bit on my own journey of kind of coming into myself. And yeah, so I'd love to hear a little bit about that for you.
Just in general, or specifically right now being in quarantine?
I mean, I would be curious, maybe your journey, because I would imagine that, you know, for some people, this is probably their first time or an unusual time in life of being on their own. So maybe some experience for you of transitioning as a traveler, someone who kind of ventured out on your own, how you navigated that.
Sure. So I've been solo traveling on and off since 2009. So I think that's over 10 years of experience being a solo traveler. And it's something that scares a lot of people because there's something incredibly lonely or very scary about being on your own, someplace where you don't know anyone. It's one thing to decide to take a weekend where you don't hang out with friends, but you're at home and you know that you have those people close at hand. So then to put yourself into a situation where anything familiar or anything comfortable or any sort of support system feels very far away, that's, I think, terrifying for a lot of people. And I give a lot of credit to my family and my parents for sort of raising me to have that sense of comfort and stability in my own skin and with myself. I was remembering recently even being a kid and being really happy and comfortable entertaining myself for a whole day, or spending a whole day exploring the backyard or exploring the woods behind our house. And so I think it's something that I started to cultivate way before those first solo travels I actually took when I was 18 in Europe. And so when I really trace it back, it goes back to being a kid and learning to be happy and be fulfilled with my own company. And that was a really roundabout way to get to what I actually think I want to say, which is that I think it is about really feeling complete contentment with our own company. And I think we can get to that point through travel. Travel is one really powerful path towards learning how to feel at ease in our own skin and feel complete with our own company. But I know people all take so many other routes to that, like meditation, like distance walking could be another one. So travel is one path of many, and maybe now we're all being given another tool, which is self-isolation and quarantine.
I love it. And what you said about being a child really resonates with me. And I'm thinking about my own time here in quarantine by myself. And I feel like when I'm able to tap into this sense of childlike playfulness, suddenly my whole house, because that's all I can go to, my house becomes this playground. And it's almost like, how can I connect to that space of creativity and like, oh, I could bake carrot cake cupcakes. Like, oh, this would be exciting.
I love that you said that. Also, it's making me think something, a line that's come up for me in as I write poetry and songs, and a line that came up in my book a couple times is, who are you when you're alone? Who are you when no one's watching? And who are you when you're alone in the woods? And that to me comes back to the inner child, because I think our inner child really gets suppressed by social conditioning, right? Like people telling us to grow up and be adults and be mature. And so then that child energy can come back out when nobody's watching, when nobody's judging us, or as travelers, when we're someplace where nobody knows us, so we don't care. So we're able to tap into all of these parts of our personality that maybe we usually don't let out to play.
Mm.
And then, yeah, the whole world is the playground.
Yeah, and in a way, I've definitely been noticing for myself that this element of being able to temporarily have a break from the expectations of other people is actually really nourishing this connection to my soul, my inner self, even just in moving and dancing around my room or doing yoga when there's nobody else around. I'm feeling like it's a really amazing time to actually be in deeper connection with that, because I feel, and I know many people in this group are empaths and people who very much connect to the energy of other people. So certainly for myself, I'm noticing that this break where I'm not constantly in contact, physical contact with other people, it's almost like an opportunity to be more in touch with my own emotions and energies, and really sink into, okay, when there's nothing around me stimulating me, what is it that really revs my motor? What brings me joy? When there's nothing around me that's like pulling me with sparkles and confetti, you know, it's just like, ooh, what's arising from inside of me?
I love that. And it's incredibly nourishing, and those times are also incredibly instructive. They teach us so much about, right, what I like the expression used, what revs your motor, but, or, you know, what lights us up, what actually makes us laugh when no one else is telling the joke, you know, when you giggle when you're by yourself, you know, that's your sense of humor. Like that's what you really think is funny.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I've also always appreciated about you is seeing Toby as someone who really moves to the beat of her own drum. And it has, at least to me, it has this magnetic quality. Is like, oh, this chick knows what's up. Like she's really going for it. And there's something so alluring about that. But what I've learned, like by being friends with you and then exploring that for myself, is that it's not that I'm trying to be like you or that anyone else needs to be like you. It's like, how can I find that access inside myself and follow my own drum, not Toby's drum or anyone else's drum.
Right, because only you can follow your drum and no one else can follow your drum. That's sort of the essence of it. Like no one else can be you as well as you can.
Except maybe we can be in some kind of like percussion thing together. Like maybe I'm
yeah. We're really building a good metaphor here. Like that'd be a good friendship or a good relationship. And you start to create this whole dual rhythm together.
Yeah. So one thing that's also coming to mind is, you know, we've been talking about some of the opportunity that being alone and being able to connect inwards through isolation presents. And I'd also love to hear from your travels and perhaps as it relates to right now, some of the challenges that you have faced in spending a lot of time alone and how you might have navigated them.
Sure. I make a distinction between solitude and loneliness. And I'm cautious always right now with our current situation of like, yes, I think it's super important to look to see the opportunities, to see the silver linings, but also to acknowledge that this is an enforced period of isolation. No one is choosing it. And there's something for me that feels very different about not having much of a say in it. I've done a couple of vision fasts, which is where you go and you isolate yourself in the woods for 3 or 4 days without food, and never felt like anything was being taken away from me because I was making the choice to take those things away from myself. And so for me, something feels very different about this period of time where we're being told by the government and being told by health officials to stay home with good reason. I'm not arguing with it, but there's a different quality to that kind of aloneness. And that's the distinction for me between loneliness and solitude. Solitude for me is always something I've chosen. Like, I need my alone time. I'm going to go to the mountains in Italy. I'm going to go to the woods in Vermont. I'm going to go to a remote farm in Costa Rica. Whereas loneliness, it's this feeling of, I actually really would like to be out in the world connecting with people, but for whatever reason, that's not available to me. So it's a feeling of lack. And I kind of lost track of where I was actually trying to go there.
Yeah.
But right, then as a solo traveler, what's interesting is you actually often have to seek out solitude when you're a solo traveler, because everyone is curious about the foreigner who's traveling alone. And so that's something I found consistently over the years traveling solo, is that when I actually want to be alone, I have to make a concerted effort to get away from people, because there's always someone who wants to talk. There's always someone who wants to go with you. There's always someone to eat with, someone to have a conversation with, someone to go out with. I'm sorry, I'm just sort of talking in circles now.
Yeah.
Solitude and loneliness, they're two twin experiences, but they're quite different.
One thing that came to mind as you were sharing that, I like this distinction of loneliness feeling like it comes from a place of lack. Because to me, you were talking about how this is an enforced isolation. And I also think that there's always the mental component of how we're choosing to approach something. Because like you, I mean, I haven't lived abroad or solo traveled as much, but I lived in Tuscany and was spending a lot of time alone for many months of the year as a cycling trip guide. And I didn't really have much choice in a lot of that. Like, I just, by the nature of my lifestyle, was not able to have intimate contact with people that I loved for a very long time. And I remember worrying when I took that job. I was like, I'm so social. I'm going to be really starved. Like, I'm going to really have a hard time with that. But
I remember talking to you about that.
Yeah. And I also noticed that when there was a mental shift and when I was able to tap into this sense of wholeness and a certain degree of kind of surrender to the experience and just being like, this is how it is. Like, this is just how it is for right now. And releasing the resistance around it, like resisting wishing things to be different than they were. It was like the kind of pain gap between what I wanted. Okay, I really want to be with people and I can't be with people. Like, that was my problem. I thought it was that I needed to be with people all the time, but really it was because I was wanting something that I couldn't have. And so I'm finding, at least for myself, that at least in this time, I've been like, actually, I feel pretty great being being by myself. And part of that is just this complete like, okay, this is how it is. And I also feel that part of what prevents me from making that shift, when I'm not able to move from loneliness into solitude, it's usually because there's something inside of me that I don't want to feel. Like, I don't really want to touch what's happening right now. And I really need something else to kind of move my attention outwards.
Right, because like any negative emotion, it doesn't feel good to feel lonely. Like, it doesn't feel good to feel angry or sad. And so, and of course, you know, it's a platitude, and we all know you can't move through it without allowing those feelings to actually have their time. You have to feel them. But loneliness is uncomfortable. Loneliness is like sitting with this sense of I only have myself, and it doesn't feel like enough. Like, if I had to summarize it in a phrase, that would be the feeling of loneliness. And I love what you said about surrender, because that applies to so many things in life and solo travel, of whatever the situation is, whatever's uncomfortable about the situation, to click into that realization of there is nothing I can do about this in this moment, and then to relax into it and just allow it to be what it is. And it sounds it's so easy to say it. It's so much harder to put it into practice. But those moments where we actually feel that are magic. They're moments of transformation, of going from loneliness to solitude, of going from fear to surrender. You know, whatever the transformation is there, that's really one of the closest things I know to magic.
Yeah, and Toby, as you were talking about your definition of loneliness, this idea of feeling like you're with yourself and it's not enough somehow. Like, I could feel I felt a lot of compassion even just in hearing that. Like, there was a lot of tenderness in that, like almost like a feeling of realizing that it's almost like a grieving of some kind. And just to say that I feel like when we're in a space of loneliness, like, there's so much compassion for ourselves that's needed, because it's a very tender place to be able to hold ourselves in that space of feeling maybe there's either not enoughness or aversion to being by ourselves. That certainly I have a tendency to judge myself for experiencing that. Like, why can't I just be okay? But that's actually kind of adding to my pain, basically.
Right, of course, because self-judgment and self-flagellation is only going to make it worse, always. Right, yeah, compassion and being okay with not being okay in a certain moment, and knowing that it passes. That was a couple of weeks ago, the phrase "this too shall pass" came up in a meditation that I was doing, and then it was just sort of a theme that was coming up in doodling that I was doing during work calls, and poetry that I was writing, and you know, also sums it up in a very pithy way. You know, whatever it is, if it's loneliness or sadness, knowing that it will pass. That if you can really internalize that fact, everything becomes a little bit more fluid. Everything flows a little bit more.
Yeah, and for me, part of that too is knowing that this will pass. It's also like, ooh, okay, so this will pass, and what weird stuff can I get up to while I have nothing else to do? Like, you know, because like This is also a crazy, unusual circumstance. I mean, this will probably, hopefully, right? Hopefully this will never happen again in our lives. We don't know. And there's a certain like seize the day element of that as well.
Yeah, I'm seeing it's so interesting because it's affecting people in such different ways. But one trend that I'm seeing are people realizing, oh gosh, I've had this dream always and I still haven't made it a reality. This might be my chance. I better do it while I can. Maybe the world is going to end.